And welcome to today's AOP webinar. My name is Philip Eidson, and I'm the host today of the webinar. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we get started, just a couple of things I want to share. One is, if you, throughout the conversation, we'd love if you would like to pose questions, share comments, anything like that with our panel. You can do that. There's a sidebar on the right-hand side of your browser. I'm going to be keeping a watch on that throughout the conversation. So if you have anything to say, anything to share, any comments, questions, please don't be shy and pop those in that sidebar. Now, the topic that we want to talk about today is procurement orchestration. We titled this session From Overwhelm to Orchestration, Empowering Your Digital Procurement Stack. So we're going to be looking at, thinking about how do we bring together procurement tech and the procurement tech stack in this era of decentralized practices. We're going to talk a little bit about procurement orchestration, and those might be a term that you have heard. It may be a term that you haven't heard. So what is it? How can we kind of leverage this new breed of technology to help bring together everything that we're working on as a procurement organization? And we'll be talking a little bit about, okay, where do we start? How do we start building business cases? And any other insights to say from the questions that you ask us throughout the conversation that will be helpful to you. Now, our guests who are patiently waiting as I do this intro are Elisabeth Schlag-Lawrence. Elisabeth is SVP and Head of Procurement Governance and Enabling at Bayer. We're also joined by Shachi Gupta, the Head of Strategy, Intelligence and Digital Transformation at Bristol Squibb. Chris Vessey, who's Executive Director of Global Product Strategy and Transformation at Goldman Sachs. And Lance Younger. Lance is CEO of ProcureTech. So lots of us to have a good conversation today. First of all, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being on the panel today.
Great to be here, Phil.
Now, to get started, what I'd like to do is just understand a little bit of context for each one of you of the role that you're in and the organization that you work for, kind of where you are from a procurement perspective. So then that will provide a little bit of background to the conversation as we kind of go through the questions that I have today. So Elisabeth, I'm going to ask that of you first. If you could just share a little bit about your role and procurement at Bayer.
So I'm at Bayer, and I've been here for going on 3 years this year. Originally, my background, however, is not necessarily life sciences. As you know, many of us have crossed paths before. Mm-hmm. I originally come from the consumer space, fast-moving consumer goods, and I'm used to a very fast pace and not much budget and, all the usual consumer pains, right? And I've been in, procurement a few years. And right now I'm in a role where I call it the Center of Excellence on steroids. I joke around about because it's called governance and enabling. I don't love the governance because it sounds a lot like making rules.
The police.
And while we are a German company, living up to our reputation sometimes, we do make rules too. We write a lot of the policies, but we try to be more involved in a lot of the enabling. But we make enabling a lot more interesting, a lot more sexy. So we have a lot of the work we've been doing around lighthouses and innovative disruption in technology, and work among others also with Lance here and in the way of finding new technologies. And our biggest rule is that we try not to talk about the technology. I tend to always say that it's a problem we're trying to solve, and then we talk about the technology. So we like to be kind of procurement geeks, and we do everything from process optimization through innovation technology to we even have a liquid organization called the Rapid Deployment Team. So we have some pretty cool stuff in my group. I'm very fortunate to have quite a few geeks in the organization.
Lots to dig into today then, and probably not enough time to dig into it all.
Yeah.
Shachi, how about your role and just a little bit of context of Bristol Myers Squibb for anyone who isn't familiar with BMS and kind of where you are on your procurement journey?
Sure. So I'm Shachi. I basically have 18 plus years working across different industries, very similar to Elisabeth. Worked in agribusiness, CPG, FMCG, financial services, and now life sciences as well. So common paths for some reason. And truly, it's been sort of a journey of driving strategy, innovation, and growth in all of these organizations. And I've been fortunate, I feel, in working alongside a lot of the CDOs and CPOs, driving, I think, 3 common themes, which obviously continues in Bristol Myers Squibb as well. The first one really is about driving innovation and growth across end-to-end value chains, right? So whether it's farm to table, whether it's farm to shelf, whether it's the work that I did in commodity trading, execution, logistics, financial risk, and now in the drug development to the patients, really the focus is on how you connect that value chain to drive that value creation that needs to happen. The second theme always has been around how do you really think about solving multidimensional problems, right? The length and the breadth. And I think that's really what excites me. So that intersection of everything that we deal with, people, process, data, tech, systems, of which people I find the most rewarding and the most challenging. And lastly, the third one, which I think has been sort of key and central in my life, has been the full circle of strategy and bringing it not just to execution, but truly bringing it to a thriving space, right? So I think the place where it's fertile enough to keep evolving, being agile enough, right? So it's like one thing to envision something, but how do you keep on sort of having that evolution sort of a lens to it? So that's really what I've been doing for so many years. And BMS, very similar story. It's a transformation journey that we do. In fact, I think we've had too many transformations. We went through a huge integration in 2020, 2019, wherein we had the largest integration in the life sciences space with Celgene. And post that, we kind of got into orchestration actually a lot sooner than most companies in 2020, when I kind of created that vision as to what that needs to be as for us. And we are almost a year into implementation. So we'll share that journey with you as we talk for more. Yeah.
Lots of lessons learned, I'm sure. And also love the fact that you talked about transformation not being I think about it's an evolution, is it? It's continuous improvement, as opposed to here's a transformation, we start here and we finish here, and then we go on and do something else.
Absolutely.
Chris, the same question for you as well.
Great, thanks everyone. So yeah, Chris Vessey, I've been at Goldman Sachs for 5 years, and I'm not sure if it's a requirement to be on the panel, but I started in FMCG as well, and then kind of went from there, from Procter & Gamble into JP Morgan, and then JP Morgan into Goldman. And I think the whole journey for me has been one of transformation. Actually, that's definitely what I love doing. I think the idea to see both people, processes, and platforms all kind of move and evolve. And I think what I've loved, especially the last few years, although it's been obviously quite disruptive on a lot of levels, is just seeing how the culture around us is influencing how we do things in the workplace so much more than it used to. And I think the way our employees are expecting to engage with our kind of processes, our solutions, and what they expect is completely different than it used to be even 5 years ago. And so I think that's kind of been a real momentum for us. We've been on a pretty significant 5-year journey, taking kind of 20 plus platforms that have been in the firm for a number of years and decommissioning them, replacing them with other applications, and then kind of realizing through doing that there's a need for some level of coordination and orchestration that we can talk about today. So great to be here. And I have to say, just one thing to add, I'm desperate to get the adjective sexy into my kind of procurement stack. Now Elisabeth kind of said that, and that's a good one. I'm determined to find a way to use that adjective more in procurement. I think that's a good one.
Well, by the end of it, let's see if we've got some good sound bites along there. We'll challenge Elisabeth to get that into the webinar as much as we can today. Lance, I want to come to you. You've had experience on both sides of the table. At the moment, you are CEO of ProcureTech. And if you just explain a little bit about what ProcureTech is, and then I got some follow-up questions specific to process orchestration.
Yeah, great. My background, I started in automotive, but I was lucky enough to work at Goldman Sachs for a few years as well, prior to Chris's time. So he's mopping up on the mess potentially I created. So thank you, Chris, for keeping the record straight there as well. But and as you say, Phil, had time working for a number of consulting businesses, software businesses, and being in these operation roles as well. But we set up ProcureTech about 3 years ago now to help basically match digital solutions together with leading corporations, but most importantly, to help them scale. If you don't match in the right way, then you can't scale. And if you don't have the capability within a procurement organization, or indeed in the digital solutions, you can't scale. Because we fundamentally believe procurement can't achieve everything they want to achieve without being digital. There isn't enough people to go around, and there isn't enough capacity and capability to go around as well. So yes, that's what we do, Phil.
Yeah, and that scalability, I think is one of the greatest challenges that we have, certainly that we've had over the last 20 years of the professionalization of procurement, is how do you take individuals who are very, very good at their job and scale that across an organization? Because at the end of the day, it's still been a very people-based based profession, almost in spite of our processes and technology sometimes, that individuals have been successful rather than because of. So it's how do we make those actually enable us so everyone can be as successful and impactful as, you know, the greatest kind of stars on the team.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk terminology. And before we talk procurement orchestration, I'm going to ask about process orchestration. So what do we mean, Lance, when we talk about process orchestration?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Even the wording is potentially incorrect, because a lot of people talk about process orchestration, connecting different parts of your workflow together, connecting different capabilities together, end to end throughout procurement. But in reality, it's actually so much more than that. Yes, that can help with the user experience and the user journey, but it's probably more importantly about data and data workflow and data processes as well. Because by tying the data together and the process together, then you create a natural fabric or workflow going from one step to the other. Mm-hmm. The nice thing about process workflow is it can be very deep in a particular area, or it can be shallow going across your end-to-end process as well. And we're seeing it being applied in both ways. So yes, it's called process, but in reality, it's process, data, and ultimately people as well.
And how much of it is, how much does automation play into that? So is it essentially automating different processes so there's less stop-off points?
It is. A little bit of the analogy I often make is that a lot of people know about RPA, robotic process automation. It was something that was put in to fix problems, to create, digitalized steps. Whereas this takes it a stage further, where you're automating whole workflows. Mm-hmm. And then your point there about the intelligent part of it is, again, something that's often not thought about, because in reality, yes, you can automate the workflow, but it needs a level of intelligence or decision within that to make sure you can truly become autonomous through the process.
So there's a lot of there's still governance and management of the of those automated processes to make sure that they're doing what they should do, but it's not just set and forget.
100%, and that has an implication on one, your design, but then two, how you manage it on an ongoing way. And automation, it isn't new. It's been around for a long time. It's just been sort of low code, or it's been basically old architecture and technology, as opposed to what you're seeing now as well. But fundamentally, yes, you still need some level of governance or management of the workflow as well.
So I'd love to understand, if we go kind of around the room, to understand where each of you is on your automation, or should I say your process and procurement orchestration journey, kind of what led you to begin that. So Elisabeth, for context, how far down the line have you been in looking at procurement orchestration, starting to implement? Is it something you're just considering? Where are you today?
So probably even Lance can even speak to this even more so, since he's helping us with doing this. We're in the early stages of it. We're doing a pilot right now of looking into it in more depth, as to really giving it, what do you say, putting the rubber where it meets the road, just to see if it's going to take. I think, Chris, you were also mentioning something similar. It'd be interesting to hear about what you're going through. But more importantly, as I said before, this really was, I call it the gravy on top, right? Like it's almost like an icing layer that you put on top of everything else that we've built. So for me, it's more complementary to our vision, if that makes sense. So yes, this is a pilot. We're just barely starting, and we really believe in it. And we really think it's critical for all these kind of tools to go in, to go to like a DPW, whatever you go to in the way of technology events, and then kind of pick your raisins out, and then say, I'm going to come home with 3 or 4 nice ones. I've looked at all these others that make me crazy because they're way too confusing and everybody's duplicating, in many cases, the same space. I come home with my 4 raisins, and then I run my pilot on them. And to me, that's really what we were trying to do here, and say, this is one of the tools we feel is really important to us, because it's going to create this layer on top of everything else that has really been detrimental to the user experience. And I think what was key, what you said before, Phil, and I think Chris also said it, was culture and people. And what I'm very afraid of, we're going through a very large transformation right now. I think it's quite public. I think it's super cool. It's called DSO, and it's really about shared ownership. And if you think of it simplistically, and I'm sure I'm not doing anybody a favor who officially does all the lingo on this, it's a whole art form you have to learn and what it all means. But in so many words, it's nothing else than acting as if it's your own company. Yeah. How cool is that? And if you end up doing that, you have to help these poor people in the business not getting lost in 52 different tools that they have to log into. Last time I had a CFO call us, one of our country CFOs, and he said to one of my people in the hubs in, I think it was Asia, and he was like, I have to log into 14 different tools to get my data reports. Are you kidding me? You know, that's not cool anymore. And so to me, as we start acting like it's our own business, and we stop, and if I may say, justifying why procurement exists, which is another whole topic for itself. I personally think that that era has come for us, that we can no longer say we just exist for the purposes of inventing our own world, you know, lovely, but we've all been down that road. I don't see that purpose. And until we can't show our real value, like Shachi said before, also with enabling and empowering people and tools, to me, that's what orchestration is all about. Make their life easier, the user experience.
We've talked for years about mindset, you know, in various different forums, and that mindset of owning the business within a business, I think, is critical to really the future of procurement. You have to see yourself as being a service provider. And we talk about this all the time, that you have to compel people to want to come and work with you, to have a positive experience, because otherwise they don't care if they use procurement and, you know, using air quotes on procurement versus somebody else in the business to buy the stuff they need. So I love that you're kind of encapsulating that in all the transformation work that you're doing. Shachi, from your side, where are you on the procurement orchestration journey?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that, you know, you're not calling it process, but exactly what Lance said, because I had an epiphany. I was like, why do we call it process orchestration? Should we call it procurement orchestration and financial orchestration? And it has so much of, I would say, applicability across the board, right? So really, to me, I think what procurement orchestration does for you is create that holistic ecosystem that you need as a procurement organization to not only meet sort of the enterprise goals, but to really manage that complex end-to-end landscape that an enterprise has, right? Yeah. And the best way to understand that, kind of building off what Elisabeth said, you need to understand the backdrop of what drove orchestration, right? Because I said, like, we started thinking about this in 2020, wherein there's been a mindset shift in terms of procurement. It did like a major flip, wherein we went from whatever we were considered before. I don't want to use the word transactional and all that, but we went to truly being people who were looking at driving value to the revenue, to the sales. We went down a path where we were responsible for reducing the time to market, whether it's risk, sustainability, diversity, our impact on community, on the globe. That's what procurement is doing now. And at the macro level, if you look at sort of the supply chain disruptions, the inflation, and the geopolitical, wars and environmental stuff, I think procurement needs orchestration. And I wanted to give you this answer. It's a little long, so bear with me. Because when we chose the why behind it, we had, in my mind, 4.5 reasons behind it. And the half is important. So the first one really was we wanted to go from a space of complexity and chaos to simplicity, right? So the fact that the reality in most organizations is you have siloed processes. So whether you're looking at your category management, sourcing, contracting, rec to order, your invoicing, everything is siloed. And you had modules which were serving each of these spaces that were not talking to each other. So the need for creating that streamlined, simple workflows, which not only connects the processes end to end, but also integrates the different systems, was key for us. That was like the first. So simplicity was the first driver for us. And I love the fact that it also makes the plug and play possible. The fact that there's democracy in terms of it doesn't have to be one end-to-end solution, the biggest aha that everybody had. Why not? Why shouldn't we use? And I don't think we should go for best of breed. I think we should go for optimal solutions that fit our ecosystem. So having that freedom. The second one really for us was really the visibility aspect of it. So you'll be not surprised that most things are black boxes, right? So we were in a previous, I think Lance, Elisabeth, and I were in a previous conversation where most of the foundational data is, sort of almost invisible or inaccessible to most of the business, the enterprise. So how do you have not only the visibility, but also the traceability? And there are two journeys here, right? There's an intake to order journey, and then there is a category strategy, which is more of a, I would say, a strategic, less of a push, more of a pull, a strategy all the way to payment. So the second one was visibility for us, all the data fabric stuff, the intelligence that Lance spoke about earlier. And the third one, which is the most important for me, is really the journey where we went from non-compliance, reactive, chasing our tail. Because again, a lot of the organizations I've been at, they're driving these $1 billion savings portfolio. And so there's value enablement, but there isn't value realization.
Mm-hmm.
So you went through this amazing supplier consolidation. You have this amazing supplier contracts with strategic suppliers. But what the business or the enterprise is doing is they're actually going and doing these sporadic purchases, which are not at all compliant to what the path that you laid out. So we wanted to go from non-compliance to intelligent pathways, right? And I love this conversation about grids. So behind the orchestration, the decision rule engine is basically this complex grid, which is the pre-work that needs to happen. So it's not the technology, really. It's the pre-work that needs to happen that then fuels the technology. And the grid is on dimensions of what's my category type? How complex is it? How simple is it? What's my differentiated support model? Like, should something be self-service? Should be complex, where it should be like a white glove service, right? What are the different mechanisms that I have? Do I want to use a P-card, catalog, Candex, Maximo, or should I be using a very specialized technology like Decideware to source something, right? So all of those are the grids, which also then help you manage your resources, because you all have budget crunches. So how do we allocate our resources? So that was the third one. The fourth one was speed. If you are streamlined, if you are interconnected, if you are able to have that governance in place, for sure you'll get to that pace. And most of the time, procurement is seen as blockers, delayers, and I think that has been the biggest driver for us, especially in BMS, because our biggest requirement was not savings per se. It was, how can you make my cycle time faster for me to reach to my patients, from all the research and drug development to the patient's hands.
Shorten the cycle time, essentially.
The cycle. And the half, which I want to end with, is intelligence, right? So I truly believe that this is not yet infused in the orchestration platform so far, but I think the path that we're evolving to as procurement is that risk, category, supplier, business intelligence, which is all AI driven, which will be infused in these orchestration layers. Because at every point that you have, at every pathway, what are you providing in terms of collective concatenated information for them to make better decisions, right? And I think that for me is a half right now, because that maturity, that application of AI is not there yet. So those are the four and a half whys in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Well, thank you, first of all, for that. I took a bunch of notes as you were speaking too. I probably could ask another half an hour's worth of follow-up questions, but something that was, so when you talked about compliance and the grid, what was interesting, I'm just kind of visualizing this and kind of laying it out for folks to watching as well. So essentially you have, and please correct me if my understanding of this is wrong. So you have, a standard intake and all the different things that you can buy, across the enterprise. And essentially what this grid is doing is making decisions based on what somebody wants to buy to route it to all the different right places, so that, there's not necessarily manual triage, or it's an email that goes into someone's inbox and sits there for a week because they're busy or they don't know what to do with it. If it's something that can be, or that they can basically go and buy on their own within some guardrails and other systems you've already set up in place, it's going to guide them to that. If it's something that's highly risk related or strategic or cost related in terms of spend, then it might come somewhere else. It may come into your strategic team, but essentially setting up all the guardrails for the right thing to go to the right place.
Exactly. You nailed it. That's really what. Sorry, Lance, go ahead.
I know. I was going to say, and here's the thing, Phil. Literally, I've just had a workshop this afternoon designing those channels. So yes, you've got the channels for sourcing, channels for buying, and channels for supply. And now, basically, you've got the ability to integrate the solutions, integrate the intelligence, and better still, with kind of generative AI being implanted within it, there's intelligent mapping of data points, intelligent enablement of steps in the process. So it becomes all automated.
Yeah.
I remember way back, when I was working at Ariba, this is 2005, we had this one guy who had the brain the size of a planet, and he tried to create an Excel spreadsheet that did this. And we used to basically go to clients and basically say, imagine if, you did, and we'd map it all out. But the problem was the solution was individual capabilities that weren't connected. So it looked great in an Excel spreadsheet and what it could do, but the technology wasn't there to tie it all together. And now it is. Now it is.
Yeah. And I think another interesting point to say, Shachi, that you said was about, it's not even necessarily looking at best of breed for each. So one of the things I think about technology is there such a thing as best of breed? Because it's all based on the organization that you work with. Everybody's needs are somewhat different in terms of capabilities. So now you're looking at this as the ability to plug and play lots of different solutions, but actually you've got a layer on top of it. So that's pretty seamless to anyone who's a user. And so you're only really thinking about that behind the scenes as opposed to what's the UX and how complicated, and the CFO that's got to log into 14 different systems to get their data is not really something you have to worry about so much when you're putting a layer on top of it.
Well, the thing is also we'll get shut down, right? So I mean, the reality of the world that we live in from a budget restriction perspective, it's like, is it a good to have? Is it must have? Like, it's like, do I really need a best of breed? And the reality is that if you truly understand your ecosystem, and every company has a different ecosystem, where their process maturity is, who the people are, oh my God, the cultural aspect of it, like, does IT love procurement? Does IT hate procurement? Like, I mean, that has a huge impact on what you end up doing. So I don't think that the solution is best of breed per se. It's what's optimal for you that is a good fit. And I think that's where organizations like Lance's, we've been also in conversations with ProcureTech, is once you understand what the problem statement is or what you're trying to solve, and you have now all these providers out there, especially I love the fact that we have so many procurement technology tools, but then an A might not be a good fit, or a D might be for because of the different dimensions that we have. So it may not be a best of breed that you choose, but what's the right fit for you, right?
And Chris, I'm going to come to you in a moment just to kind of talk about where you are and some of the thinking behind kind of getting process and procurement orchestration off the ground. But there's a question that came in, and maybe this is a question for you, Lance. The question is from Manish. Manish says, do you think procurement orchestration is way behind the overall digital orchestration of different processes, systems, frameworks we have in global banks, for example? And I think Manish comes from JPMC. If yes, why and how much are we behind? Are we to know, is technology in the procurement space catching up with what's available elsewhere?
I think there's a demand and supply answer to this question, because process orchestration isn't new, and a lot of the big platforms, like ServiceNow, Appian, Pega, have been around for a long time, and indeed they've spent a lot of the time in finance and in banks, basically automating the customer-facing solutions, automating ticketing systems. But what has changed over literally the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, and rapidly over the last year, is the introduction of solutions that specialize in the procurement area and therefore have deeper knowledge of the procurement object, of the data objects, of the supplier record, of the processes, enabling them to refine the use cases to be more aligned to procurement. What that means is that whilst procurement might be behind, that overall in the application of bigger solutions like ServiceNow, they're actually not so far behind when it comes to some of these niche solutions that focus on procurement as well. The other thing I would say is the adoption of orchestration within procurement is happening very, very rapidly. You look at Zip in the mid-market, over 350 customers. It's significant, and so there's a rapid adoption, which means that if maybe people do feel like they're a little bit far behind, then it's going to be quite easy for you to pick up the baton.
So we've Shachi, you've helped us kind of imagine the art of the possible. Chris, I think you're a little bit earlier in the adoption of the journey. You're kind of looking at, is this something that makes sense for us? Is it a path that we should be going on? And as you start to pitch the idea of procurement orchestration internally, what are some of the ways that you have been kind of selling this idea as you start to get internal buy-in for going on a journey yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd start by saying I think it's really important that we don't just see orchestration as part of an evolution, but it is really a revolutionary change. Actually, I think if you really step back and think about what this really means, I mean, the best analogy probably is one of an orchestra, right? I think it's very easy for us across the organizations to optimize individual elements of something, to have the best trombone player, the best violinist, the best percussionist, right? But what we don't do well often is joining that together to have an orchestral piece. And actually, the best pieces of music are not ones that you automate, where you kind of pre-record and then just sample layers on top of each other. The best pieces of music are ones where you've got that kind of that live feeling, where there's a conductor who's bringing swells and slowing and speeding things up. And that humanization, we kind of started to call it within Goldman, of this orchestration is critical. Because I think what we've realized is that, exactly as some of you were saying earlier, like procurement can be undervalued sometimes. It could be looked on as being not critical for the firm to move forward by the individual users. But we know as procurement that actually the value add is significant. And if we could, we'd have a procurement professional sat next to every single user in the firm to guide them through what they have to do, right? And actually, like our belief is that is what orchestration lets us do. Because what you're able to do is to build a solution that has elements of automation, where you automate certain parts of the flow that make sense to automate, but it has a dynamic and a humanized nature to it if you design it well, that lets you actually morph around the different scenarios and not feel to a user like they're stuck in some kind of impossible channel. And that as their needs change, they have to restart the whole thing again to try and find what they do differently. But instead, they can actually move seamlessly between lanes based upon kind of automation controls, or based upon people in the loop to actually redirect them slightly, or to kind of bring them back on course again, so they're not kind of in that situation where it's all becoming confusing to them. Because I think as the culture has changed, what we've seen is that people are much more kind of self-protectionist now. They're more insular. People don't want to get out of their lane if they don't have to. They don't want to have to try and just get their job done and go home again. And so we have to make it come to life for them. And so I think we've been envisaging this predominantly like a bit of a simple kind of visualization is this a conveyor belt, where basically you have this transaction moving along that gets stuck or it falls off, and there's manual intervention and moving it around again. And we've cast this idea and this vision that just resonates with a lot of our users who are frustrated by that kind of like clunky kind of movement between systems, or the lack of understanding of where they are in the flow, and how do they move to the next step in the flow, and who do they reach out to help when something goes wrong. And so for us, I think we've been really driving that vision that this truly is something that can actually make you feel like you've got a procurement professional sat alongside you. It's a solution that's dynamic, that means you can respond quickly. So even if you have a problem statement you think you're solving for, and you configure a solution that way, the reality is the problem statement changes very quickly. And we've seen that across the last 5 years. The problems we solved pre-COVID and the problems we're solving post-COVID are completely different problems. And so I think we have to have a solution that has that dynamism to it. And the sad reality is the big ERP solutions don't have that. It's not inbuilt within how they work. And so we need to find ways to do that. And this orchestration layer, I think, is fundamentally like how to achieve that.
So you look at the layer as being, it allows you to bring flexibility that's greater than the sum of the parts. You know, the individual parts may only be able to, and are perhaps harder to configure and reconfigure when you need to do that. Whereas the orchestration layer on top allows you to be a lot faster in terms of how you change how everything kind of interacts with each other and the guardrails that you may put in place.
You have much better data. I think Lance said at the start, right? He's exactly spot on. It's really a data problem. That's really what it is. I think, and to have good data, you need good compliance to process and policy. To have good compliance, you need a good user experience. Because if the users don't know what they're doing, they will find the fastest path to exit, right? That's a guaranteed skill that all of our users have. And if you're not orchestrating that, you can't get there. And so you use this to gather data, and that data helps you make it better and improve and to reorchestrate. And the nature of the flexibility of these kind of applications is that you can reorchestrate very easily. It's very dynamic. There's no multi kind of layered kind of complex waterfall project to kind of change the workflow. Like you drag and drop it and it's done. And that is wonderful actually in terms of the experience.
I see there's some great questions coming in the chat as well that I'm going to jump on in a minute. But Elisabeth, I'm glad we've got you back. I'm not sure if there was some tech problems going on in the background there.
I heard everything though, so I was remote. The usual tech experiences right in the world, yeah.
But what I was going to ask is, where do we start? You know, as you're starting to look, okay, I want to start understanding the impact that procurement orchestration can have for me. Where do I start in terms of, I'm going to focus on this individual process or this part of the workflow? You know, were there any kind of rules that you followed or pursued when you were thinking about getting, you know, experimenting and starting your experiments in procurement orchestration?
So I would never claim to be, you know, Shachi and these guys really. I mean, she can talk much more in full depth about where, you know, every aspect of the technology. To me, it's more around the pragmatic approach. We took it in slices. It was a little bit like the salami tactic, you know, in our old days of all of our Karas training. Every negotiation starts with, you know, slices. And to me, that's what this was. We really decided that there was a segment that we wanted to test. That's what we are doing. And then we're going to move on to the next. I think this is how it should be for any technology. And I also would, honestly, I'm a tiny bit, you know, we're getting all excited. And of course, it's all about orchestration this session. But I think sometimes we, you know, we tend to jump on the next pony that's there. And it's like, oh, this is the next hottest thing. And it's so cool, right? We've all been through this 50 million times. And as you said, Lance, you know, at Ariba, I also remember 2002 or something like that. We did Ariba implementations when it was still with free markets, all the old worlds. Yeah. And I think we've all learned some lessons about, you know, that everything solves everything. And to me, it's about this new agility, I think, that I'm looking for. So if you ask how do we approach it, what I'm looking for a lot more is, and I think this might be something we have to build out in the team that we maybe don't even have to that extent yet today. Sachi and I were talking about it the other day. She said, are you friends with IT or not? So we're definitely friends with the people across the fence. But at the same time, you know, like with my first session with them, they said to me, oh, we have these RPAs and they're really great. I'm like, well, you know, honestly, no offense, but you're just automating a broken process. And I didn't make a lot of friends that day. But, you know, to me, in the end, if we can create more, really an agile team, as cliche as it may sound, that can work closely together with tech-minded people, you know, like Sachi has actually a tech IT background kind of thing, you know, like those kind of people like Mark, the guys on my team, people that can think process, but can also think tech and can at the same time then understand procurement, right? You have to understand procurement, like it or not, it's just a must. And that's where we would start. We slice off the partitions, we test them. If they don't work, pull the plug and don't even wait for 90 days. This whole thing about, oh, 90 days, don't care. Pull the plug now, don't care. Next, thank you, you know. And I think we need to stay agile in that way, because I think that's also what, no offense to the ERP world, but has created these large dinosaurs that are great in financial basics, but I think in procurement we need to start challenging that we don't get put to the old world of, you know, IT, HR, and everybody else has kind of gone to the wayside. I'm not terribly interested in becoming purchasing and being outdated again. I think there's a reason why we exist, and we have to show this agility. Like Chris is also saying, my people don't have time on the front end, my business stakeholders. I have to make their life easy enough. So the answer is, to me, pick out the slice that makes the most sense to your stakeholder and remain agile and listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, just as that show, just quickly, I just think one I would say is from a Goldman point of view, we would definitely, I would say that where we've found the biggest benefit is starting with the intake. I think just because once you get the intake kind of done well, then you have a lot more power and choice about how you move it forward through the flow. So that I do think if you've got the opportunity to work out building that single face to a user and say, like, whatever you want to buy, whatever you need to get hold of, whatever you need from us, if it's a new vendor, if it's a new kind of attribute, you want to kind of do a sourcing project, whatever it is, start here and fill in this form, and the rest will magically just work itself, right? I think if you can start with intake, I think we at least capture the noise then, and it may be a manual process after that initially where you can't orchestrate everything, but to start with, if you get that right, that makes a massive impact, I think.
And honestly, you're already making their intake so much better, right? Because in most traditional intakes, it's, 45 form fields, you know, what does that mean over here? And you have to click on the I where it says next to what it means, and I'm not really sure exactly, right? That's going to take 50 years. And this intake itself is already a better experience. And hopefully that will guide them and us through better data, right?
Philip, if I may add to what both Elisabeth and Chris are saying, I think the thing which is really powerful now, which probably didn't exist before, right, is this low code and a no code aspect of it. How much money have we spent on solution implementation partners or people who are configuring the silo technology that we have? I think what's happening, if you start combining the teams that Elisabeth is talking about, sort of that multi-dimensional talent, which is tech savvy, data savvy, functional savvy, right? But then you give them platforms like this. So for example, now there are solutions out there like Oro, for example, who have the ability where you don't need a technologist to go and do the configuration for you. It's low code, no code, wherein it's almost like a drag and drop in terms of designing your process workflow, right? So let's say today, and we all know this, our processes change all the time. They're very complicated. Somebody comes, has a different opinion, right? If you are able to give that empowerment to the team that Elisabeth mentioned, let's say her lighthouse teams, right? And now they use these platforms where whenever they want to, they have the ability to go and design, change, create the kind of experience, the workflow, include the data objects that they want. I think it just gives so much freedom also. And I also feel that what's changed in the landscape, when we were looking at this, you were like, will Ariba be willing to let us connect and have a read and write option, right? That was the question in our head. Will Cievo be open to it? Will Icertis be open to it? And now we're moving into a world where all of these companies are willing to partner with each other. And together, like what Chris was saying, it's an orchestra. Together, it's the music, it's not the single pieces and the separate pieces of it, right? That comes in. I think that to me, when you look at the final impact on money that you spend on technology, that's our business case, right? Mm-hmm. You have talent, you have the technology, which does not make you spend money on all these other peripheral things. It goes a long way for you.
And honestly, that's why orchestration is so powerful, right? Because I think you can then switch out for best of breed whenever you want to and not affect the end user experience. And as you optimize these products, and you're right, exactly right, Shachi. I think when you think about the fact that these products can now specialize and deeply specialize because they know they can be connected into any architecture that you have, they're willing to go deep and invest well rather than trying to be everything to everyone to try and win some kind of business model. And with an orchestration layer, you can just plug and play via really robust connectivity, APIs, all that kind of stuff, the recipes you've got to connect things through. And that is game changing actually in this industry, I think.
You can, Lance, I'm going to come to you in a sec. So I just wanted to jump in as well and say you can also test your processes. So you can experiment your process with a really small sample size, like you would if you were doing marketing and you want to go and see if something works and you want to A/B test it. Well, now you can kind of A/B test, if you will, different processes, see which processes work, which are faster, which leave gaps, which leave you with vulnerabilities, which don't, before you then go and scale them because you're able to do it in a small sample size. Sorry, Lance, I know you were trying to jump in.
No,
Elisabeth, I'll give you the floor in a sec as well.
A couple of quick points, and it comes to the question that was asked earlier as well, is in essence, because procurement's scale and breadth of activities has gone so wide, there is never going to be a one solution for all. So it's almost like procurement were waiting for orchestration to happen to create your own platform. So Chris is creating his own best platform for Goldman Sachs, and he's got the tools to be able to do that now as well. The one thing I would say, and it echoes a little bit what Elisabeth said, is just get started somewhere, set yourself up with a team that can work in iterative sprints and go things. You do need to have half an eye on where you're going to end up, because the worst thing that can happen is you let leash one of these service, the solution providers, and it's like painting the fourth bridge, as we say in the UK, or it's just, it never stops. Now, as long as it's going the right way, that you could argue that's okay, but it's when it becomes an 8 to 10 year Ariba implementation, but just called ServiceNow, that you want to kind of start thinking, no, that's not the right thing. So yes, start quick, pick something to get started. Intake's a great place. I agree with you, Chris. But also have a mind to what the total cost is going to be when you get to the end position.
Elisabeth.
No, I was just gonna make, me with my always things that come into my head around, maybe it's no longer best in breed, maybe it's best at need or something like that.
Yeah.
Who says best in breed? Like that's such a terminology we've come up with. There is no longer best in breed. We talked about it back then with Ariba, right? It was like, oh, it's going to solve everything and end to end, and it's we all integrated. Well, welcome to the club. That not picking on Ariba, but all those things never really happened. You could say the same thing about a lot of those others. It's not about so much best in breed. It's about using what's best for you. And in many, I think there were some questions on the side also about what technology we're talking about or whatever. I think in some cases you have to also make your own decision of what fits your culture and what fits the problem you're trying to solve. And in some cases, it's not just about like, oh, it's the exact same building block as, BMS did, so I'm going to do the same thing. No, think about what you're trying to solve and don't just run after another tool to me.
There was an interesting back and forth in the chat. There was a question, I think it was Martin that asked the question originally. Can you envisage a time in the future where designing or even building your own workflow is part of category management? And Shachi and Chris, I know you both jumped on that. Chris, I want to start with you because you said something really interesting that I'd love you to explain a little bit. Your response was fundamentally the category strategy should be enabled via orchestration. So I think as I'm understanding that, orchestration is kind of coming first before strategy. Is that what you meant by that comment?
No, I mean, as in, once you've got a strategy, I think the challenge we have today is, right, you've got a lot of sourcing managers who've got a fantastic vision of what they're trying to do. They're well informed, they've got access to information, to data, they've got the experience, they know what the kind of the businesses are trying to do, but then trying to bring that to life in a process that enforces and controls and ensures that actually the vision they've had is realized through the end-to-end supply chain is often lacking, because there's too much rogue spend, there's too much independent thinking, there's kind of people thinking they know better to go and do certain activity. And then when you've got a category strategy and you understand what it is you're trying to achieve in terms of whether it be targets around things like kind of diversity, ESG type targets, whether it be targets around like preferred supplier kind of percentages or geographic targets, you can weave all of that into your orchestration. And so the whole point is then when the users are going in, they don't even realize they're being, again, slightly moved towards the path you want them to take. Yeah. They're not being blocked and told, no, you can't go any further. They're not being sent back to start again. They're not being told they've got it wrong and what a terrible behavior. They're being orchestrated through the process. They feel like they're being led by the hand through what happens end to end. And that fundamentally, if you use the tools correctly and you build it in a way that you've got the right data elements of it, you're asking the right questions to the right person and gathering the right information, I think you can enable all of your strategies within the orchestration layer, and that ensures you can have the success that you want end to end.
Okay, that's helpful. So Shachi, from how do you balance, because you responded, there's obviously orchestration platforms out there that allow category managers to have that ability within their own categories to orchestrate their own processes. How do you balance, let's say, individual category specific or even product or service specific buying processes that are orchestrated within a tool with corporate policy? Because historically, we've always gone and said, okay, these are the rules, we've got to fit with the rules. And even though we know that marketing buys differently than, buying some compound, the rules are still the same for each one. So I think that's always been a struggle, is how do you get that flexibility while not breaking the policy, the processes that we have in place?
Yeah, so I think the beauty of this is it gives you the balance of having that freedom and agency, but at the same time, you do have the guardrails, like the hand that Chris was talking about, right? And I think it comes down to the grids that I was talking about earlier, right? So if you are a category strategy leader, right, you already know how you want to segment your category such that depending on the complexity and the different specialities that you have, where does each one of them fall in terms of what kind of support model do you want to give to the business? I genuinely believe there are certain categories where you don't even need to do anything as procurement. The business knows better than you in some regards. Because we have a lot of stuff, for example, in R&D, which we say, okay, this is something that we segment out. It's a direct business path that they have. And we have a lot of, again, platforms and all that we direct them to, per se, which they're used to. But then it's also about saying, okay, what are those paths where, it's already something that's negotiated, it's self-service. And I guess that's another pathway that comes into being. But whenever you have a non-preferred path that Chris was talking about earlier, how do you then, again, bring procurement back in? But it's not a reactive, but a proactive thing, because where I think orchestration can extend itself is also create an experience for category managers and business partners. So one of the things, again, in that half that I was talking about, what we started creating in BMS is something which we call the category workbench.
Mm-hmm.
It's an experience for the category and managers and the business where we flipped the game, where we were mapping the spend to the product area. So we took the product spine, let's say by oncology, by cell therapy, and it said within that space, they don't care how procurement is organized. They care about what the product is in composition, right? The totality of it. And what can we bring to them in terms of information of spend, contracts, suppliers, that universe that exists, and then what the opportunities are. So we created an experience, sort of a platform where a category manager and a business partner would go in and know exactly what that composition of the product is, what are the different contracts that are existing, what are the suppliers, what are the possibilities. And that to me is a more value generation, proactive approach. So I think it's a blend, right? So you decide which segments of your category deserve that, which of them don't need that, and it leads to better management. I'll say something provocative here. I feel a lot of procurement organizations are gung-ho on outsourcing. I would say if they do a better, and it's like, oh, I'll save money, I'll just outsource. And so many of them are they're regretting it because they have done that and they don't find the same amount of specialization or service that they want to provide to the business, right? If you do a better job planning that grid and that segmentation and implement such platforms, it's not like just a trigger like, oh, let me outsource, right? Because some of them are truly valid for outsourcing. I'm not denying that. But it's this pre-work that's needed. So it's a balance.
You can be highly, highly targeted then. Let's say you go down the outsource path where, I need specific subject matter expertise, for example, in this one thing, because we just don't have it for this one project. And that grid is going to take you down that path to,
yes,
I need to go out doing that versus I need to outsource, and therefore I'm going to kind of outsource everything. And, then it's really just going to depend on what projects come up and, what my contract says. And it's very much a general approach versus a highly targeted. You feel exactly. Targeted. Elisabeth, I think you maybe.
Yeah, to me, that's really the key. And that goes back to me also for the category strategy. I think there were several questions in there too. I think, I mentioned the DSO part earlier for, maybe an overused term with us a little bit, but just the fact that you're saying that it's more, I don't really like the word customization because, all of us with technology already makes your neck hair go up. You're like, oh my God, they're going to make a customized version. But in some ways, orchestration allows a certain amount of customization, user experience that is unique to what you're doing, what you need, right? To Shachi's point, I now can go in and it will guide me throughout the right path where I need to go. And therefore, I think it almost in some parts we need to challenge ourselves. I think what we immediately said, I heard the word policy right away, right? Oh, well, it says in the policy and have to be compliant and then they're going to have to do it. Who says that's still the truth? I think what we need to really do is re-challenge ourselves and say, maybe we don't need as many category strategies as we have today. Some of them are quite an art form. Some of us had hundreds of pages in our past life. Don't know if that always adds value, let alone their PowerPoint or something frightening that they're not even integrated into anything. And when is anybody taking them off the shelf again to update them? And the person has maybe left the company, which is even worse. And, so your knowledge retention is becoming more and more challenging. Your degree of specialization is challenging. So why not select a little bit like Eloise Epstein talks about your supplier management? Why boil the ocean across everything? The same thing with category management. I think we've overdone it with some of these areas, that this orchestration will finally allow us to give everybody their own entry point, have a certain selection of core category strategies, have a certain selection of data sets we collect, and don't do everything. I think that, and then give some of it back to the business. And Shachi, actually, I agree with you on the outsourcing. At the same time, there's that balance, like Phil says. I don't think today we should do some of the categories we do. I think that some of the categories are ill-informed sometimes that we do them. We should give them away. And instead, why don't we create these generalists of liquid teams that bridge this relationship internally, right? Like almost like consultants. And they come in and they help the information, but they don't have to be specialists at full depth, which I think this augmented model of a hybrid is going to help us get to the next level. And hopefully that's what we're designing in DSO.
Phil, there's a question in the track here about what's happening in the market. Who are the players in the market? And without sort of naming names, I want to answer the question in a different way, because the market is dynamic in terms of the digital solutions that are out there. You have basically providers that are as I called them before, they've been around for a long time. I will name a couple of names: ServiceNow, Pega, and Appian. And their core, they're operating at the enterprise level. You've then got a number of solutions that are new, they're procurement specific, but they're split into two different areas. They're the ones that are operating at enterprise level, and those are operating at mid-market level. And they're solving slightly different problems, because often at the mid-market level, they're operating in an area where there is no procurement function, there is no procurement process, there is no finance process, because they're often acting at the interface, versus the enterprise-specific solutions, which have got the ability to work at the process level, the integration level, the data level, when it all comes together. And you need to be aware of that as you engage. The third aspect as well is you've got solutions that have basically integrated orchestration within their solutions. You wouldn't know that they're a low-code platform, no-code platform like Certa that's built, and they've gone incredibly deep on risk and supplier onboarding as one of the use cases. So you've got to kind of appreciate the market and the dynamics, and also understand the history of these organizations and where they're going and their roadmaps. And the fact that, yes, we're all incredibly excited about the potential of the market, but literally 2 days ago, one of the providers in the market shut their doors. They shut their doors. So something wasn't right. Either their core technology wasn't right, they couldn't sell very well. They were a relatively big team, but not massive, but they shut their doors. So it's just being aware of the market and the dynamics and going through the same due diligence you would do with anything to select the right solution, to make sure you're selecting something that's going to be the right fit for you as you scale as well.
And so I know that we've only got a couple of minutes left. It's one of these things where I think we could probably spend the whole afternoon or evening going off into all kinds of different tangents related to the topic. We've talked, I think, very positively about the opportunity that is presented in front of us by building procurement orchestration layers. And I guess, Lance, I'll ask this to you just because you have that kind of bigger picture view of the market. What's some of the pitfalls, if you could say in a minute or two, like as you embark on this journey, what do you need to know that you might not know before you start?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched upon this as we've gone through. I think you need to think about the problem in a different way. You can't go into it with a predefined solution, and you need to have a different team that's engaging around it, and then also is going to basically design and run it going forward. They need to have a more of a product and platform mentality, because if you just go in the same, and Chris, you mentioned this before, if you go in with the same incremental point of view, evolutionary, you'll not get the true potential. You'll end up with the same thing automated as well. So the other pitfall is, and I mentioned this as well, is not planning for the full or eventual scenario. Not getting to the end picture, because you ultimately still need a business case. It still needs to stack up with everything that you're doing as well. So a few things there. I'm still incredibly excited. I think again, you called it, Chris. I think this is a game changer for procurement and for the whole digital ecosystem that we've got as well.
Well, I also, sorry, Sachi, was
I was just going to add
close the doors?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is, I think people have to realize that this is not it's an ecosystem that you're talking about.
Yeah.
You almost need to step back and look at the full picture to truly derive value from it. So you may decide to phase it out and scale it, but you need to when you kind of step back, the team that designs it has to look at it holistically, right, to derive true value from it. So investment in the right team and that right structure is key. And really pulling in even the stakeholders, because that has really worked for us, is really having the design SMEs, if you may, the dream team, right? The business is involved in it, they're invested in it, finance is involved. It's not just procurement, it's finance, suppliers, business, etc. The other thing which I'd say that pitfall I see is sometimes some of these platforms want to do everything, right? And I understand the need for it because you want to cater to people who don't have technology already. But then you're again muddying the water, because at the end of the day, orchestration in my mind is the top layer, right? Yeah. And you can have somebody playing the flute, somebody playing the guitar, but we need the conductor, right? So the conductor also goes and starts playing the flute, then, right? So I think there's a danger in that. That's just my last comment.
Well, I know it's a topic we're going to dig into a lot more over the course of the next months, because as we've talked about, there's so much opportunity for procurement. I want to thank everybody for joining us and listening in, and for popping comments in the chat, but also to our panelists, both for sharing your experiences, but also jumping into that chat and answering some questions and some back and forth as well. That's very helpful. So thanks for your time, everybody. Elisabeth, Lance, Shachi, Chris, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to speaking more on this topic in the future.